IShowSpeed is probably the most famous guy on the planet, and that's no exaggeration. From the States to the Middle East, all the way out to China, Speed is meeting stars and making fans by the boatload. But how did a random streamer nobody knew about just a few years ago become a global sensation? Speed was born in 2005 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Growing up in the late 2000s and 2010s was a very different experience compared to even those born a few years earlier. By the time Speed was in his late teens, the internet had morphed and changed a dozen times. He'd lived through the rise of YouTube. He'd seen the establishment of mega channels with millions of subscribers. He'd watched content creators growing up and became fully engrossed in online culture. This is a far cry from a lot of older e-celebs who had to fumble about trying to find what kind of content worked for online audiences. Speed was already familiar with live streaming and the popularity of gaming and IRL content. The stage was set. It just needed someone brave enough to step up and be the main act. The young Speed wanted to be that guy. In 2016, at the age of 11, he created his YouTube channel and started uploading a few videos here and there a couple years later, showing off his 2K skills and Fortnite gameplay with friends. But by the late 2010s, Speed was still too young to really get a foothold on any platform. There were millions of kids just like him all over the world with little channels like Speed's. Everybody wanted to be a content creator. If he wanted to be that guy, Speed would need to set himself apart. For a bit of context, in 2018, content creation looked a bit different. While Twitch and YouTube were definitely growing, they also still weren't at the ridiculous sizes we see today. Internet celebrities like Ninja were big, but they weren't on the same level as Hollywood stars and the like. Then, everything changed. 2020. The COVID pandemic turned the world on its head. Everyone, including kids, was suddenly locked indoors for months on end. People had nothing to do but read, watch TV, and of course tune into their favorite content creators. Kids were already familiar with YouTubers and Twitch streamers. Now, adults were too. This is when things started to shift in favor of the e-celebs, a total explosion of exposure. On top of that, the technology had become so accessible, pretty much anybody could turn on their webcam and start streaming. But Speed was still only 15 by this point, only just old enough to drink in a handful of countries. But here's the thing about Speed, the guy just doesn't stop, ever. He didn't care one bit that others might think he's too young, he just did it. Act first, think about the consequences later. This non-stop energy would pay off big time, but also get him in some trouble. Not that that bothered him, of course. Some clips began circulating of Speed raging out and smashing his stuff while playing Fortnite. People found it funny, and they loved his ridiculous no-filter outbursts. Speed was far from a household name, but thanks to his consistency and a helping hand from COVID, he'd finally left a tiny mark on the internet. In true Speed fashion, he'd used this little mark as a springboard to launch himself to stardom. Speed's YouTube channel was growing steadily, but slow and steady wasn't Speed's style. He wanted to become an absolute beast of the internet. So, he adopted a game plan. Just do as much content as humanly possible. It didn't matter what. As long as he could bring his insane pace and energy to it, he was on board. Live streams, e-dating shows, IRL content, gameplay, you name it. All Speed cared about was getting his face on people's screens, no matter what. In one way, Speed's approach was genius. He took full advantage of the rise of TikTok, which had been skyrocketing in popularity at the time, to spread short clips all over the platform. These shorts hooked people into his longer form content, which helped spread his shorts, which hooked more people in. You get the idea. One of Speed's best ideas came from Talking Ben. Talking Tom and Friends is a super low-key Slovenian app where you could talk through your phone to an animated dog called Ben. You would say anything into your phone and Ben would respond with some pre-written line. Speed would fire up the app, ask Ben some crazy question, and then blow his top whenever Ben replied in a crazy manner, like refusing to support LGBT rights or Black Lives Matter. These little moments were insanely clippable and spread like wildfire. Talking Tom and Friends itself became one of the most downloaded apps on the store. As a result, somehow, Speed turned a Slovenian app nobody had even heard of into a tool to make himself famous. These were the levels he'd go to entertain viewers and draw in new ones. By April 2021, Speed had hit the 100,000 subscribers milestone on YouTube, a big moment for any content creator and achieved in record time. Just 2 months later, he hit 1 million. That's insane. It usually takes a YouTuber years to jump from 100,000 to 1 million. Speed did it in a couple of months. So, all was rosy, right? Not quite. See, Speed's high energy approach also had its drawbacks. The guy had absolutely zero filter and said whatever came to mind right out of the gate. People adored his raw, honest approach, as did his sponsors. That is until he said stuff that was really crazy. Then, they weren't such big fans. Speed's outbursts during his Fortnite and Valorant days already got him banned a handful of times, but the truly mad moment came during an e-dating livestream hosted by Aiden Ross in late 2021. At one point, he asks Ash, the woman guest, if she would date him if they were the last 2 people on Earth. She says, no. Without missing a beat, Speed just blurts out, "Who gon' stop me?" over and over. Aiden Ross had to kick him off the stream and apologize, and Twitch later suspended Speed's account for good. A major source of revenue and fame for Speed had just been snatched away, all because he couldn't keep his mouth shut for a few seconds. His options were either to reform his ways, change up his content to be more family-friendly, or double down, go even harder, faster, and more high energy. Most would choose the former. No prizes for guessing which path Speed went with. More unhinged, more content, more speed. That was what had made him famous. He knew this is what would make him a global sensation. Speed continued his usual content on different platforms. See, unlike most internet celebs, he was actually pretty athletic. Speed's fans knew how much he loved football, especially the legendary Cristiano Ronaldo.
Cristiano Ronaldo, suey. Simple as that, bro.
He'd already played in the Sidemen charity match, making absolutely brutal slide tackles and scoring a hype goal. That was sadly offside. The guy even went out to the UK to appear on Sky Sports in the flesh to talk Premier League football and bring his online high-energy style to mainstream TV. But controversies just kept coming back to bite him. 2022 saw more than ever. He got swatted live on stream, got dropped by Sky shortly after his appearance after they learned about his weird comments the previous year, and got in trouble for racist remarks to a Chinese fan at the 2022 World Cup out in Qatar. Speed was growing faster than any content creator on the internet. His popularity was skyrocketing, but his no-filter approach was threatening it all. If he didn't rein it in, he could end up getting cancelled for good. That's when Speed decided in 2023 he would do stuff so big, so high energy, that no amount of controversies could ever take him down. Speed's YouTube channel was now in the tens of millions of subscribers. He had a multi-million-dollar deal with the streaming platform Kick. He was a bona fide internet giant, one of the biggest e-celebs out there. But Speed wanted more. He wanted the world. He wanted the kind of fame the top footballers and Hollywood actors have. This would take a couple of years, but 2023 would be the first step on that long journey. Midway through the year, Speed's dream came true. He met Cristiano Ronaldo in the flesh after Portugal's match against Bosnia.
I'm a big fan, bro. Ronaldo, look. I got you right here. Hey, wait, Suey. Ronaldo, Suey. Ronaldo, Suey. I love you, bro.
Speed was on cloud 9, to say the least, barely holding back tears. But this moment also taught him something important. The world had opened up again, and it was Speed's oyster. IRL content started popping off. Speed's boxing match with KSI sold gangbusters, which made him think that this kind of live streaming was the way forward for 2024. The next year was chock full of content. WrestleMania, another Sidemen charity match out in Qatar, heading out to the UK for more touring streams. It was content galore, and fans loved it. They poured out of their homes onto the streets to meet their favorite content creator. Wherever Speed went, a tidal wave of fans followed. So many, in fact, that they ended up causing damage to a lot of cities and train stations just by their sheer volume. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen. An internet personality drawing crowds of tens of thousands of people like it was nothing. Not even Hollywood stars could do that. Speed knew right there and then that this was how he was going to conquer the world. The 2024 Euros was a great way to test this newfound weapon, as it combined his love of football with his passion for content creation. So, Speed toured around Europe during the competition. Unlike others, Speed didn't just focus on the big countries. He jumped around the continent, going to Norway, France, Ireland, Albania, Denmark, the Czech Republic, Belgium, Poland, and plenty others. You name a European country, he probably went there. The governments of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania even funded his visits, and Speed got the chance to meet the Estonian Prime Minister in the flesh for an official tour. This was a stroke of genius. It connected Speed to communities all over the world and made those in smaller countries feel that much more connected to him. By the end, the tour alone had racked up a ridiculous 2.5 billion total views. His viewership and sub count exploded, even more so than it already had. The message was clear. The people wanted to see Speed in the flesh. It didn't matter where he went, fans would come out to meet him. So, Speed gave the people what they wanted. Late 2024, Speed announced a tour in New Zealand and Australia. He'd already conquered Europe. It was time to make his mark and conquer the rest of the planet. Once again, his tour in Australia and New Zealand did massive numbers. Fans flocked to him, and he built up communities all over the two countries, taking part in the local culture and wildlife. Australia and Europe are great, but they're not the world. In 2025, Speed made it his mission to conquer Asia and South America. First up, he hopped around Peru, Colombia, Paraguay, and a few other countries. The mayor of Lima loved his visit so much that he even made Speed an honorary ambassador for the whole city, showing just how much influence he was having across the world. Then, the real challenge came along: China. People wondered if a guy with no filter could survive an environment like China, a country known for strict rules and a gigantic population. Surely, a recipe for disaster. To everyone's surprise, it was a smashing success. Of course, Speed drew the massive crowds everyone had grown used to, but his super high energy style was welcomed by the people. The Chinese government even supported him, with news stations praising the tour as an improvement for US-China relations. You heard that right. A guy who a few years ago was getting into all kinds of drama was now repairing diplomatic ties between the two most powerful nations on the planet. The same guy who barely had a couple of viewers for his gaming streams 5 years ago. Speed closed off 2025 back home with a massive Speed Does America tour, showing how he was still very much the king back home. 35 days of non-stop live streaming, visiting all the states he could fit into his schedule. The final stop? LA at the Memorial Coliseum. There, Speed unveiled his new project before the same star-studded guests he one day dreamed of being on the same level as. The Kardashians, Bieber, Suni Lee, Randy Orton. But Speed wasn't at their level now. He was far, far above it. Only 20 years old and dominating the entire world, growing communities left and right in even the most recluse corners of the planet. Speed's journey proves to all of us that no matter how small we start out, the sky really is the limit. He started out with nothing but a webcam and a dream. Now, Speed's the biggest name on the entire planet. You never know what lies in store.